You know, I brought up that story, that the match between Rafa Nadal and Djokovic. The story is not that they're in the third set, 1 set apiece and 6-5 Nadal. The story is that it's 10:30 in France. Paul, they have a curfew at 11 o'clock, French time.
Yeah. Well, I guess they're going to start tomorrow morning.
I don't know. And the fans are getting antsy, and so that'll be interesting to see what they do with these two greats, these Hall of Famers going at it, and the delay that might be 30 minutes from now. The fans might riot inside. Is it Roland Garros? Mm-hmm. Aren't you proud of me for that?
I am.
All
the last thing you want is a bunch of angry French people.
No, you're right. Because they'll probably want somebody else to start the fight for them. Now, also, we're now joined by Max Olson, theathletic.com. My goodness, Max, this happened. This escalated quickly with the college football playoff expansion. I think everyone, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people wanted it. I'm not sure what your stance was. Your thoughts about how quickly this might go from 4 to 12?
Yeah, I'm happy with it. I mean, I think that there's certainly a lot of hypothetical ways you could go about doing this. There was a lot of attention on, are there going to be auto bids and all these details that come with it. I think the working group put this together really did a really impressive job, and I don't really think I don't personally I'm for this, and I don't find a whole lot to nitpick. I think they came up with smart solutions for some of the issues that in expansion. I think going with 12 instead of 8 makes a lot of sense when you kind of work through, what these brackets would look like from year to year, and I think the way that they went with the top 6 conference champions, solves a lot of problems in terms of, rewarding conference championships and also rewarding the best group of 5 teams. So I'm happy with it. I wish it were the law of the land, starting this year. I mean, I think it's really exciting. And I think that the way that it opens the door to so many more programs to actually care about this postseason, I think that's a huge factor.
Max, I know that there's still more work to do and hammer out some final details on this, but they wouldn't have come out with this if they didn't intend to do it, right? Right.
Yeah. This is not, and that was one thing that was so impressive yesterday was that this is really seriously just a fully formed idea. This is not, well, hey, we're going to go with 12 and we're going to go back to the office here and get back to work on what 12 looks like. This is a very clear plan. With kind of answers for all the dilemmas that come with it, even addressing, and I was slightly surprised by this, but, not having any at-large teams in the top 4, they've really thought this through. It's a credit to Bob Bowlesby and, Greg Sankey, Craig Thompson, and Jack Swarbrick that they took this seriously. And I think that, guys, for years as this topic has kind of come up, I'm sure we could probably all cynically sit here and say, man, how are they going to screw it up? And I really don't think they did.
Max, so looking at the at-large or non-Power 5 teams, I should say, have you gotten any feedback from some of the coaches or administrators on that side of the deal and kind of got their thoughts on what this means for them as well?
Look, I think that if you're at a program that has a chance to be one of the best group of 5 or more successful group of 5 teams every year, you are sitting pretty right now. If you're Gus Malzahn, you could probably retire at UCF because you don't have to go somewhere else to be able to get into the playoff and have a chance to, make runs at national titles. So I would say that about even a Luke Fickell at Cincinnati. You don't have to go take a rebuilding job, in the Big Ten or somewhere else here when you have a chance now at Cincinnati to have a playoff team pretty consistently. I think if you're at Boise State or a lot of these programs, even Sonny Dykes at SMU and Dana Holgorsen at Houston, I think you should be really happy that the door is now open because obviously we've sort of over the years here of the committee, I think as we've heard from Gary Patterson and other coaches, there is sort of this sense of, well, look, even if we go 11-1, 12-0, what if they just don't put us in? What if this is just all about the powerhouse? So I think that, and my study of the last 10 years of this showed that 44 different programs get into the playoff over a 10-year period, which I think is fantastic, and that also means that 13 group of 5 teams get in over a 10-year period. I think that is the kind of representation that this sport has really lacked.
So is it possible for all the bumbling decision-making that's gone on at the top of college athletics, they've actually potentially knocked 2 huge birds out with one stone with this idea, because not only do you address the lack of inclusivity, but also the problem that you mentioned with coaches constantly looking because they don't feel like they can go to the mountaintop where they are.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of these that I think you could potentially solve. I mean, think about when, the Cotton Bowl, with Oklahoma and Florida, right? Like if you're doing that bracket this year, Florida's the 7th seed and they've got something to play for. Like those guys are not all opting out and going pro and, that playing, like a bowl game that just doesn't matter like they did against Oklahoma. Like I think this is part of it too, that there is real incentive for these guys to stay and go try and, make a run in the tournament here as opposed to getting ready for the draft. So I think that part of it also, I think that matters a great deal. And then I think just overall for the sport, look, I still think the 4 or 5, top teams in the country who are getting all the best recruits are still going to be making the top 4 all the time and be winning titles all the time. But I don't think this is going to dramatically change the power at the top, at least not right away. But I do think there is a lot of fatigue among folks who are tired of the constant playoff talk, are tired of the same teams being in it every year. And I think this really shakes it up.
Is there something, at least from what you learned, either from what they mentioned yesterday or what you yourself have watched, studied, digested, that you aren't real sure about, that you think maybe is not the way it should be?
I think that there's going to be scrutiny and more conversation in the weeks ahead about the sites for these games and specifically the quarterfinals. Look, these things are not put together like in a vacuum. They have to take, the systems in place and work around them in some ways, and that includes the bowl system. So I am curious kind of where we end up there, if there's going to be some backlash to this plan to go bowls, go neutral sites for that quarterfinal round. And I think there'll probably be some years where, because of the way this is set up, like in one of the years I did the past brackets for this, like number 20 Boise State in the final rankings, is the 6th best conference champion and gets into the playoffs. So like there's going to be some years when there's a team that's not, in the top 12 or even the top 15 that makes it just because of the way this is set up. But I think more often than not, and there's also not going to be every year where you say, man, there's 12 amazing teams this year. But I think more often than not, this is going to, make us a lot more invested in this than the New Year's Six Bowls do. And I think it's just going to do a lot more for these programs. I mean, if you say, hey, like Baylor did in Matt Rule's last year, you say, hey, we had an amazing year, played for a Big 12 title, went to a New Year's Six Bowl. That's great. If you can say, hey, we went to the playoffs, yeah. I think that does way more for your program, your rep, your recruiting, your fundraising, everything, in terms of people really buying into the momentum as opposed to just saying, yeah, we went to the New Year's Six Bowl and it was fun and we lost, but good year.
Yeah, it's almost as if there's been a handful of teams that have a monopoly on the college football playoff. And I think even those who run college football realize it wasn't boring, but it was starting to become a problem.
Well, and think about it from the program you guys cover. I mean, if you have these aspirations of, hey, we want to succeed at the highest level, that's really, really tough to break into that top 4 on a consistent basis because you're just not going to be able to recruit at the level that Alabama and Ohio State are and the way that, Clemson and LSU do now and Oklahoma does now and all that. You're just not going to be able to get the 5 stars to go head to head with Bama. But when you sort of rethink this whole thing and say the goal is 12, I think that's terrific that you can have the 10-11 win season, win the Big 12 or don't win the Big 12, and have a chance to be legitimately rewarded for it and I think have a lot more greater impact on building up your program. And certainly, and I went through this for 10 years, Baylor gets in 3 times, and I think that would have made a huge difference.
Max, one of the things I think is, like you mentioned, that look, the 4 or 5 programs that have the most money and most recruits and all that are going to probably win this. It's how basketball really is historically as well. But the fact that they weren't even been given a chance to not rotate among the 4 of them was the problem. I mean, and the fact that college football actually saw it and is remedying it in a relatively quick fashion based on it, to me is the most surprising thing about this, because usually they're slow to anything.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that you think back to 2017 with undefeated UCF, who wasn't even close to being on the committees top 5 or top 10. Like I think we've seen enough examples over the years where, if you go undefeated, like you should have a chance. You should. I'm not saying you should be number one, but I think you should have a chance to play for something significant at the end here. And I think that there's been a bunch of examples over the years where I think people have been frustrated by the committee decisions or frustrated that it just looks the same all the time. So when this kicks in, I think it's like, aren't you guys going to enjoy this more talking about it in November and December instead of just sort of being like, well, we're out of it, so who cares?
Absolutely, right? Max. I really started to get to be a part of that group that was like, oh, well, wait, we know the 5 or 6. Who cares about all the rest of it? Not that we didn't cover games or whatever, but yeah, sure. it became irrelevant in some ways. I agree. Craig?
Max, elsewhere in college football, you had a piece on transfers, the transfer portal. Baylor's actually held up pretty okay in the grand scheme of things. 8 guys since last October 1st that have left the program. Certainly nowhere near the 25, like the full max class that Tennessee has lost in that time frame. I know this is creating some roster issues. Talk a little bit about your piece and just what were some of your takeaways from dipping into the transfer portal numbers and seeing kind of the chaos of the last years or less than a year since last October.
Yeah, I think that the one of the issues that has kind of persisted throughout since the portal was created is that, there's hundreds of players that go in thinking that this is going to be great for them and they're going to have all these offers and they're really going to, get a fresh start to their career at a big-time school. And that just doesn't come true. And there's just so many players that end up getting stuck in the portal and have to go to a junior college or FCS or whatever. And the reason for that, in a lot of ways, and sometimes it's because of their own talent and issues and all that. But in a lot of cases, that's because schools can only take 25 players a year, period. And there's really not much wiggle room for that. And if you want to take a bunch of transfers, then you got to take fewer high school players. And so from talking to coaches across the country, even ones like David Shaw that don't have a transfer problem, there really exists this concern that now that we're in this, one-time transfer phase, that players could kind of just leave any time. I mean, Alabama just had 2 backup running backs leave the program here in the last 2 weeks. One of them's going to Texas. Like, your depth can take a hit all of a sudden, and you really have no way to replace them if you're already full. And so, talking to coaches, they want to see that change. Talking to Shane Lyons, who heads, the AD from West Virginia, who heads the oversight committee, he says he doesn't really see any momentum for that changing. Certainly, if you give schools too much roster flexibility, then I think we get back to oversigning and probably the Alabamas of the world bringing in 30 to 40 guys a year if they want. So I don't know if the answer is replacing every kid that transfers out, but there needs to be more flexibility to do this. And I know coaches are pretty mad about this, and hopefully they can find a reasonable solution to that here in the next year.
All right, Max, there's been a lot of things, even during this, I guess, downtime as we lead into eventual media days. You had that very productive list that you left somebody on an island to discuss with the coaching, whatever. Max was a part of that Big 12 coaching tree, not coaching tree, and then left.
Coaching rankings of all the Big 12 coaches. Yeah, we put it together and we put it out. And then you texted me if I could come on the show, and I was going out of town, didn't know if I'd have good service, and I said I'll let Sam sort of fall on that grenade for me.
That got a lot of feedback
great
on the
teammate.
site. No, yeah, he was, and it was a great list. We loved it. I'm glad we had a chance to visit with it about Baylor's coaches outside of the 2 or 3 that were obvious or the 1 or 2 that were obvious on the list. So that got a lot of discussion. Get rest, man, and because football season's coming, and now with all this news, what's going on with the possibility of the expansion of the college football playoff makes it even more exciting. Thanks for your time.
I think that.
That's Max Olson, theathletic.com, usually with us during the season on Thursdays, with us on SicEm365 Radio. When we come back, Grayson Grunhafer, SicEm365.com recruiting analyst, also a part of the co-host with the Bearcast with Craig Smoak every Tuesday that goes up. And then Tim Brando, the college football expansion has been something, or at least playoff expansion, something